I think that was a very tragic experience for the community in on one respect, because it did really split up the community with respect to what was actually said and done by whom. Because there was Xtra did a fantastic job of tracking really the story and the story that unfolded in the events and all the key people involved. I think it's unfortunate that we had, the city councilor, meet privately with I think parties to try to destabilize, an organization that really is an organization that belongs to the LGBT community, like respected activists belong to that group. And in so many respects, I think that it was grossly mishandled because it really should have just been left alone. And Pride is actually a place where I've been out for 22 years now. And I remember when Pride was, highly politicized, and the message of sexual liberation and coalition building ran right through Pride. There was no mincing of words. Like Pride was a political event. Pride was for the people, by the people, and the focus was primarily sexual liberation, but there was a lot of coalition building with other organizations and other movements. So when I see Pride today, for example, not taking such an entrenched position on the side that they've taken, to sort of try to keep one organization out, it saddens me. Because as a community activist, I've also been very deeply invested in Pride. I've donated money. I've volunteered dozens of hours for them in the past on the Safety and Security Committee. I've stood under the hot sun, trying to keep people from moving past the barricades when we used to close off the church in Wellesley Corner. So as a community activist, I'm saddened by the results of the battle that ensued. And I'm very disappointed in the city officials for what I think was some backdoor dealings. And that's really not what we want in my opinion. That's not the kind of civic governance that I expect from my councillor or the city staff, especially when we're dealing with an event like Pride that has a history embedded in political activism. So I'm very disappointed in that. I'm pleased by the results ultimately, extremely pleased, because I think it also awoken the political voices within the LGBT movement who became somewhat perhaps, comfortable. The struggles of equal marriage, which was sort of just took out the oxygen in the room. It sort of brought people back to the forefront and said, you know what, we want to be advocates again. And they were advocating in their own circles within the arts community and other various places. But I think, this time around, what I saw was a real coalition that came together of people who said, you know what, we disagree with the process that city took, and we certainly disagree with the banning of choir, and we don't support censorship of any sort. And I think that was a very key piece for our community, because, if we were to try to be selective of who comes and goes, we are a very diverse community, extremely diverse. And it's not even just diversity with respect to sexual orientation, but it's diversity with respect to the range of people and then the subgroups that we have within the LGBT movement. And who's to say that you get to choose, right? And who's to say that one group should be excluded because of the other? If as many groups that want to march in Pride, as long as they adhere to the values and they're there for sexual liberation politics, march. Let it be a big parade.
And dissent is the very foundational root, of course, of the celebration, even in its modern form.
Yeah, that's right, and it should be, and I think that should never be lost, in my opinion. I think Pride is a very political event, and I know that there's been talk about Pride belonging to the city, Pride belonging to all Torontonians. Yeah, for sure. We hold it onto public streets. It belongs to everybody in Toronto. But let's not forget who organizes it. Let's not forget who originally created it. And I would think that my role as city councillor, especially on a board that hosts Pride with the sexual liberation history that we have in this neighborhood, is to ensure that remains that spirit of Pride, that political action, the voice, not just of dissent, but also of protest, of action, political currency. I think that should never be lost.
So what would you have done had you been councillor this year,
Mm-hmm.
in this case?
If I was councillor this year, and it was, I hope that everybody has now sort of decided that they're going to go back into their organizing committees and say, how do we all join the parade next year and make it bigger and better? And you can organize your contingent and bring them out.
But this year, in hindsight, and
Mhm.
hindsight's very powerful, but in hindsight, had you, rather than Kyle, been councillor this year as this past June, as the controversy unfolded, what would you have done? How would you have handled it?
Well, I wouldn't have had any backroom dealings behind closed doors to the exclusion of the community. I would have encouraged Pride Toronto to have an open discussion and dialogue about the pressures that they were facing. And I would have done everything I can to facilitate constructive conversation. And knowing that it's, democracy is messy. If you want to have everybody's voices in the parade, it's going to be messy. But if we have some very basic foundational rules that we adhere by, the ability to respect and respect our diverse opinions, I think there would have been plenty of room at the parade, quite honestly. But instead, what ended up happening is that, closed-door meetings took place. There was all sorts of, in a certain respect, there was almost a movement, a little quiet movement to silence one group, and that was wrong. Wrong.
There was a very